So during this presentation, we'll be diving deep into the DC Oral History Collaborative grant opportunity. If you would like to see captions during this presentation, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's an ellipses, and you can click on that and captions would show up if you would like that. Because this session will be recorded, it will be noted on the website, and the recording itself will be on the website as well as the slides. Throughout the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to just start talking. There will also be breaks throughout the presentation for Q&A, and you can also write any questions or comments in the chat too. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and we can get started. Okay. So can everyone see my screen? Great. Yep. Okay. So like I said, this workshop is about the DC Oral History Collaborative and the extension. Throughout this presentation, again, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to ask. And this presentation will go in this order. So we're going to start off with introductions of us at Humanities DC and who we are as an organization. We'll talk about what is oral history and the importance of it. Then we'll go into the actual grant opportunity. Then we'll invite everyone else on the call to introduce themselves, and then we will do a deep dive into the actual application. All right, so we can start off with staff introductions. So again, my name is Hillary Steen, and I am one of the community grants managers at Humanities DC. And I am your main point of contact for DCOHC grant-related questions. So Leah, could you introduce yourself?
Yep, my name's Leah Gage. I am the other community grants manager, and I oversee our grant portfolios and can be an additional point of contact for any grant-related questions.
Right. And Jasper, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, yep. I'm Jasper Collier. I'm the manager of our DC Oral History Collaborative project. And throughout the grant period, I would be the person providing any advice, guidance, and support on your project throughout the life of it.
Great. And Loy, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Loy Nemar, Director of Grant Making and Programs at Humanities DC. Good to see you.
Great. So we are the team. We are the people who you will be working with throughout this whole process. During the application timeline, especially, I will be your main point of contact. And then Jasper would become an additional major point of contact if you become a grantee. And so a little bit about what we do. So Humanities DC helps all Washingtonians and others connected to DC deepen their relationships with the city and each other through the sharing of unique and universal stories, the fostering of intellectual stimulation, and the promotion of cross-cultural understanding. And so in order to fulfill that mission, we do both community-informed grant making and also partnership-based public programming. If you have been to any of our programs or are interested in our programs, they're fantastic. On our website, we have more information about all of our wonderful programs. But we're here to talk about grants. So in 2024, we expect to award $1 million in grant funding across 6 grant programs. So that will equal approximately 62 grants in total. So in cycle 1, which DCOHC is a part of, that application opened on December 11th and it will close on February 20th. And then cycle 2, that will open on March 4th and will close on May 1st. So we have 6 grant programs. They're all wonderful. And I encourage you to take a look at all of them if you're a little unsure about which grant you would like to apply to. And so as we go into what Humanities DC is, I want to share a different screen, ideally. Okay. Mhm. All right, so this is our website, humanitiesdc.org. And if you go to the Community Grants tab at the top and go down to Grant Opportunities, this is a really important page to be able to see all of the grant opportunities and really key information that will help you regardless of which grant you actually apply to. So if you keep scrolling down, these are the 6 options. The DC Oral History Collaborative is right here. And if you click on that, you will be able to see the request for proposal, FAQ documents, more general information, etc. If you keep scrolling down this page, we have some more information about other workshops that we've done. Like I said earlier, there are 4 grant opportunities in cycle 1, and we're doing workshops for all of them. So this is the 3rd one. We're doing our last one about our Visions grant tomorrow. We will also be continuing to do information sessions in case people want to learn about all of the grant opportunities that are available. And then down here is applicant resources. And I'll be coming back to this part of the webpage later on in this presentation, but this is where you can find the link to Foundant. Foundant is our grants portal. This is where you will be submitting your application, as well as general FAQs and an opportunity to sign up for office hours, which will be one-on-one conversations with Leah or myself to talk about your individual project. And if you keep scrolling down a little bit, it continues to have information about all of the grant opportunities in 2024. But then at the very bottom, it just provides the full list of all the 2023 grantees we have. It's just in alphabetical order, but as you're beginning to think about your project, we encourage you to take a look at this, to look at all of the big variety that we funded in 2023. And if you scroll down, you'll eventually see DCOHC specific projects too. So we are Humanities DC. Humanities is a very major part of who we are as an organization. And so before I provide the definition that we use for the humanities, I want to open it up to the whole Zoom room to just give us some ideas. What do you think the humanities are? If you would like to put anything in the chat, you're welcome to, or you can just start speaking. So what do you think the humanities are?
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Well, I think it's an organization that they help with cultural programs to the DC residents. I'm not sure if Humanities is an organization or is part of the DC government. I'm not sure, but I like the fact that they support many programs. I see in the years that they support oral histories and another programs like poetry and acting.
Yeah, thank you. And you brought up some really good points about what we do as an organization, as well as what the humanities are. And to answer your question, we are not part of the DC government. We receive funding from the DC government, but we are a separate nonprofit entity. But thank you. Anyone else?
I see in the chat here, to me, it's the stories of people that evoke empathy and promote cultural advancement of a community.
Yeah, very nice.
Mhm.
All All right, so the humanities are human stories, and these human stories allow us to navigate the complexities of our past, present, and future. So they help us learn, they help us empathize, and they also challenge our assumptions. The humanities are a compass for interpreting what humans make and exploring what makes us human. So as you can see, it's a pretty broad definition, but at the end of the day, it is about who we are as people. And so they really help us understand our stories past through specific disciplines such as history, anthropology, and archaeology. They help us understand our stories' expression through specific disciplines such as literature, linguistics, languages, arts, history, theory, and criticism. And they also help us understand our stories' values, such as within ethics, philosophy, comparative religion, and law. And no one seems to have talked about the arts, but I wanted to provide some clarification because the arts are separate from the humanities. We could theoretically fund artistic expression as a conduit to the humanities or a way of expressing the humanities, but we do not fund the arts for art's sake or just for performance sake. We do fund arts history, theory, and criticism, but we do not fund the arts as a standalone topic. So just wanted to provide some clarification because it can be pretty tricky to differentiate the two. And I'm happy to answer further questions about that as well. And so we're going to now pause a little bit to watch a brief video about oral history specifically, since this is a grant opportunity that focuses on oral history. So stay tuned.
I'm a native Washingtonian. I'm from Southeast DC. I model, I dance, I act.
I am an archaeologist.
I am a unique, interesting person.
There's a lot of stereotypes about DC that are thrown around.
You know, that's just a place where our government is.
To where politics reigns supreme.
But it's actually community and home to a lot of people.
It's much more diverse neighborhoods and historic neighborhoods that people don't really know about.
So we have to give the narrative, the experiences.
And through oral histories, I really want to highlight these contributions that people don't typically know or aren't necessarily written about in historical records.
It's so easy to just feel like your group is not important if all you learn about is what this person did, what Christopher Columbus did.
There's a lot of resilience that goes into being able to survive those circumstances and still come out on the other side and say, we can be better.
So just to sit down and talk to someone and give them an opportunity to just to tell their life narrative is a very special thing. It's almost like your imagination is ignited.
Just every time you think you know what someone's going to say, they are going to say something different. And that's fabulous.
Your story is important. Your history is important.
It's kind of like giving a gift to the next generation.
And when you share it, and you'd be so surprised and so shocked at how many people be like, oh my God, I went through that too.
When our children and grandchildren look to us for inspiration, they're going to learn from us and whatever it is that we try to do. So it's important to have these stories and to share these stories and to shout these stories and to sing these stories to inspire others, not only to step up to the plate and feel good about themselves, but to share their stories as well.
I'm a native.
So now, based off of that video, wanted to go a little bit more in depth about really what is oral history. And in taking a life history approach, the oral historian seeks to document the narrator's journey through life, from early childhood through the present moment. The goal is to probe the ways in which the narrator's life story resounds with overtones and undertones of broader historical significance. So these are a series of interviews between an interviewer and narrators, as we call them, which are the people who are being interviewed. And it is a very broad conversation. So it is related to other kinds of interviewing, such as for journalism, sociology, things like that, but it's deeper, it's broader, and it is really more focused on subjectivity rather than objectivity, because these are people's memories and their own lives. And so it goes beyond just a series of short questions with a narrow scope, like some of these other areas can possibly focus on. And oral histories are key tools within the humanities. You are totally welcome to interview people about non-humanities topics too. So for example, one of our current grantees is her oral history project is about Dr. Dorothy Harrison, who was a nurse and medical anthropologist in DC. She worked in public health for several decades. Science is not really a humanities topic, but she is utilizing the tool of oral history in order to get interviews about a non-humanities topic. So definitely oral histories can be a broad focus, a broad topic. Lots of options here, definitely. And oral history is incredibly important. It is a crucial part of individual and community identities. They produce historical documents for future generations. And oral histories are important to the interviewers, the narrators, and also to the general public too. This allows people to be open to digressions, surprises, and unforeseen pathways in conversations during the actual collection of the oral histories. And it's really about the art of relationships. So between the interviewer and the narrator, between the public and the narrator's story, it's really important. And it's a great area that we work in. And so Humanities DC, DCOHC grantees are considered members of the DC Oral History Collaborative, hence the name. And so the collaborative is a partnership that we have with the DC Public Library, and it's a citywide initiative that documents and preserves the history of Washington's residents and communities through oral history. And all DCOHC grantees, again, are considered members of the collaborative, and all members receive access to training, ongoing guidance. You become part of this incredible community of oral historians around the city. You have access to an online oral history platform called Their Story, and there's a lot of potential for partnering with other organizations, with other individuals on programs and events that feature the oral history work that you help collect. And so focusing more on the actual grant. So the DCOHC grant is done in order to collect, document, and preserve at least 5 new oral history interviews that are all linked by a central research question or a theme. This grant is open to DC-based individuals, community groups, and 501c3 nonprofits. Individuals and community groups can apply through a fiscal sponsor. I will go into a little more detail about really what a fiscal sponsor does later in this presentation. The maximum award for this opportunity is $8,000, although you can also request an additional $5,000 that focuses on translation. The project period is from April 15th, 2024 to December 31st, 2024. And the asterisk is here because the project period on other documents lists a different day, but the project period is actually going to start on April 15th. we will be updating the website with this new date. So just be aware, the project period is April 15th of this year through December 31st of this year. And as you are thinking about applying for this grant opportunity, just keep in mind to keep asking yourself why oral history is the best approach for that particular research question. We have 5 other grant opportunities at Humanities DC. So why is oral history the best format for the project that you want to do? And so that's just something to keep in mind as you go through the application process. In 2024, we will fund approximately 14 DCOHC projects, and the application is due on February 20th, 2024. And relatedly, we also have a DC Oral History Collaborative extension element of this opportunity. And this is only for former DCOHC grantees of Humanities DC, which would allow them to continue working on their successfully completed oral history projects. And so if you want to apply for the extension specifically, you have to have closed out your DCOHC grants that you were given through Humanities DC previously. It is to extend the same project. And so the maximum award for this is also $8,000. You can request an additional $5,000 for a translation. The project period, again, is April 15th, 2024 through December 31st, 2024. Again, we will be updating different documents on our website as well as the website itself to reflect this slight edit in the project period. We hope to fund approximately 6 extension projects in 2024, and the application is due February 20th of 2024. And so I said earlier that this opportunity, if you would like, you can apply through a fiscal sponsor. And so this is open especially to individuals or community groups without a 501c3 nonprofit status to apply through a nonprofit organization. And that organization would serve as a fiscal sponsor. Fiscal sponsors assume all financial and legal obligations of this grant. So they would be the ones to actually submit the application. They would be the ones to formally accept any funding, and they would be the ones to submit the interim and final reports. I'll get into reporting later in this presentation. So even though the fiscal sponsors might not be very closely tied to the actual project activities, they would assume all the financial and legal obligations instead of the individual who would be theoretically the project director to actually do the activities themselves. You are allowed to budget costs to pay the fiscal sponsor. We'll get into budgeting later in this presentation, but no more than 10% of the full grant award may be used to pay the fiscal sponsor. So if you request $8,000 for your project, 10% of that is $800. So you'd be able to pay a maximum of $800 to the fiscal sponsor for any administrative work that they're doing, etc. If you would like the fiscal sponsor to be part of your project, you have to, in Foundant, which is our grants portal, use the fiscal sponsor's organizational account rather than your own account. It is important that the applicant for this kind of project is the fiscal sponsor. And later in this presentation, as we're going through the actual application, that will be made a little bit clearer. All the eligibility requirements that are noted in the request for proposal or the RFP still do apply to fiscal sponsors. And then just wanted to provide 2 examples of current grantees that work on oral history projects. Again, you can see the full list on our website. When you scroll to the bottom of the community grants page, you can see the full list. But two to highlight for right now, one is a project with an organization called Vision House. Their project is called How the Equal Rights Center Became a Powerful Force for Civil Rights. And so they're interviewing people who are connected with the Equal Rights Center and the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to see how they advance the cause for civil rights and equal opportunity in DC. And then one of our extension grantees is Vikram Surya Trivolu, and his project is called The Legacy of Anti-Racist Neighborhood Housing Organizing in Adams Morgan. And so he is interviewing members of the Latino community and on creators and residents of affordable housing in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of the city. And as you can see from these two projects, as well as the other ones that we're funding this year, it's a wide variety of really amazing projects, very diverse topics. So it's a really cool to see all of the potential options here. And so I know I just threw a lot of information at all of you. So I'm going to pause right now if anyone has any questions so far. All right, moving right along. So now we want to hear who's in the Zoom room. So if you can go around and say your name, your organization that you're affiliated with, if at all, and tell us a little bit about the project that you're considering, as well as why you think oral history is the best project format for it. So anyone can start. You're also totally welcome to say it in the chat.
Can I start? Can I?
Yeah, totally.
My name is Jose Gutierrez, and I'm a DC resident historian. I'm I want to apply to see if I qualify for the grant of oral histories, and my target population is the Latino LGBTQ community. So I'm taking a lot of notes right now. I have a lot of notes here. So I'm planning to do it as an individual. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Jose. Anyone else?
I'm Celestino Barrera from Colombia, and I am a social research work with immigrants daily in Washington. Institute, DC Afro-Latino Institute, and idea or idea is different.
Sorry, your audio is being really muffled. Could you try repeating yourself or typing it into the chat?
Hello, now is better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Celestino Barrera. I am from Colombia, and I am working here in Washington, D.C. with day laborers, community immigrants. We help them to navigate the city, and we offer racial instruction or racial education, and we help them with immigration issues. Or idea, because I am part of the DC Afro-Latino Caucus and the Afro-Latino Institute. There are organizations that organize all the Afro-Latino and Afro-Caribbean diaspora in Washington, D.C. And we are working now in documenting our historic or memory, what are the contribution that our people made for the city. For example, one of the big contribution, but not many people are talking about, is the go-go music. The relation between Afro-American and Afro-Caribbean build the go-go music. The drums, the beats, the rhythms come from the Caribbean and Latin American Black people. And now we are working in documenting something like that, but we are documenting some artists like Carmen Turruel Quander, and she's a painter and curator, and she changed the idea about the Afros in the museums in Washington, D.C. It's not just Afro, it's Afro diaspora, because it's not just Afro from US, there is Afro from Latin American and from the Caribbean too. And that is that one, what we want to talk. We want to interview different people from the Afro diaspora, from different countries of Caribbean and Latin American, and talk about their contribution for develop humanities and knowledge and social economic in Washington, D.C.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I see a couple things in the chat. I just want to call out Taylor shares that she's affiliated with the Welders and working on a project of telling the stories of people in DC through interactive art and theater. And Oluche is here mentioning that they wish to capture the hidden histories of evolving neighborhoods in DC so we can examine our realities to those histories. And why oral format? Because the stories need to be captured first for us to relate to them. So thank you both for sharing that.
Great. Any final projects? All right. Well, as the presentation progresses, if you want to talk a little bit more about your project later on, totally fine. So now we're going into more of the nitty-gritty aspects of the application. So the DCOHC grantees must attend a 3-session in-person oral history training workshop that will happen on April 17th, April 19th, and April 23rd. So before you apply, please have these dates open on your calendar, because if you are chosen as a grantee, you do have to attend these trainings. And these trainings will go into detail about how to do oral history. It will allow you to think closer about how you really want your interviews to go. We'll talk more about the requirements, etc. You will also be able to meet all of the other DCOHC grantees. It's an incredibly helpful session, and it is required for grantees to attend. If you want to apply for the extension funds, you do not have to attend this training workshop because you have already attended. Then on August 15th, the interim report will be due. And this report is relatively simple. You would just explain all the funds that you have spent already on your project compared to the budget that you submit in your application, and also provide a brief overview of what you've been able to accomplish so far. Then there will be final deliverables that will be due on January 30th of 2025. So for each and every interview that you do, you'll need to submit a media file, either audio or video, as well as a transcript, an index, and metadata. So transcripts are word-by-word text of interviews that you do. Indexes are time-coded summaries of the different segments of your interview. And metadata provides some key information such as where the interview takes place, when it takes place, the names of the key people, how long it is, things like that. And all of this additional information will allow your oral history project to ultimately be housed in the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. With the People's Archive, this will enable your interviews to be for the public, since it's with the DC Public Library. And it is totally, totally fine if you have never heard these kinds of terms in your life. The training workshop that will happen in April will go into detail about what this actually looks like and how to do it. But just be aware that all of these deliverables are required for DCOHC grantees.
And we just had a question in the chat I want to highlight, Hillary. Jose asked what the hours are for those 3 trainings. I believe they will be 6 to 7:30 p.m.
Okay, that sounds right, yes.
Yep, I see Jasper nodding, so I think that's right.
Wait, I'm sorry. The grantee workshops are 3 hours. So
Okay.
they're 5:30 to 8:30.
5:30 to 8:30, great.
Then also due on January 30th is the final report. So this will be where you will explain all of the funds that you've spent for your project. Again, compared to the budget that you submit in your application, as well as documenting all of those expenditures. So that would be copies of your receipts, of your invoices, of timesheets, things like that. As well as a full project evaluation. So the deliverables are the specific things that we need for the results of your project in order to be housed in the DC Public Library. This final report is a broader opportunity to tell us how the project overall went, as well as, again, providing us those key financial documents. And just wanted to be honest with you all. For each oral history interview, past grantees have said that each interview takes between 20 and 50 hours. And I'm not saying this to scare you or intimidate you, but this kind of project does require a pretty big time commitment because it goes beyond just collecting the oral history. It goes beyond just, meeting with that person for an hour. It really involves attending all the trainings, conducting research, scheduling the interviews, editing transcripts, and seeking narrator approval of them, creating the indexes, producing metadata, all of the administrative requirements, etc. So as you are thinking through your project, keep this in mind for how many people you expect to interview. For DCOHC applicants, you have to interview at least 5 people. We've had people in the past say that they are going to interview 100 individuals, and that is not, that is most likely not possible for this grant, although I guess you never know. But just be aware that each oral history interview takes between 20 and 50 hours in total. And so keep that in mind, even as you are thinking through if you would like to apply for this grant, what kind of time commitment you are able to give for this kind of project. And don't worry as well, because again, I don't want to scare you or make you intimidated by all of this, because we do provide extensive assistance throughout the project. A lot of the information will become very clear during those workshops in April, and also throughout the project period. Us on staff are able to answer your questions and help you out throughout. So it's definitely a big project. It's definitely a big undertaking, but you will definitely not be alone with all of this. Any questions about these requirements?
Go ahead, Jose.
Um, well, it- I I don't have any idea how to do the indexes and uh, me metadate or metadata. Um, can somebody help, or it is difficult to do it or not?
So we will be going over that in the trainings themselves, providing more information about how to actually collect all that information. So it's totally fine if when you submit your application, you don't know how to do that, because we will teach you.
Yep, and there will be plenty of, examples of, previous transcripts, previous indexes. Yeah, you won't have to kind of go it alone on those things at all.
Right, so next are allowable and unallowable costs. So this is specifically relevant for the budget part of your application, but it also might inform other elements of your application as well. So this grant can fund things like recording equipment, transcription, translation, recording platforms, honoraria, publicity and promotion. It's a pretty broad range. So on this slide, definitely pay key attention to the right-hand side where we list things that this grant program cannot fund. So we will not fund any non-program specific costs, which would include rent, overhead, indirect utilities, restoration of buildings, things like that, as well as general office supplies. We also do not fund any food and beverages, entertainment, social activities, or fundraisers. We don't fund tuition and scholarships, debt reduction, re-granting, or any funding to any government agency. If you are thinking of using oral histories to do an interpretive work, such as creating a documentary or an exhibit or anything like that, this is not the grant to do that. DCOHC focuses primarily on collecting new oral histories and being able to archive those. If you wanted to take those oral histories and do something else with them, then we invite you to look into another grant that we have, which is the DCOHC Beyond the Archives grant, which allows you to take oral histories out of the archive, beyond the archive, to do other things with them. So just keep in mind that this grant is specifically to collect new oral histories and archiving them.
I would just add to that really quick that like you can kind of think of these three opportunities as linked together. If you think long term about your project, you might receive a DC Oral History Collaborative grant this time. You might decide you want to do more interviews and apply for an extension grant in a second year. And then by the third year, you might have an archive built up to the point where you want to apply for the Beyond the Archives grant to do some sort of public project with them.
Exactly.
And Oluche asks, is there a way to browse through existing oral histories at DCPL? And the answer to that is yes. I believe.
I'll put the link in the chat.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. Jasper will include the link to the Dig DC People's Archive.
Yep. Because really the point of the archive is to allow oral histories to be open and free to the public. Any other questions right now?
Yeah, the format for the interviews, it will be just audio, no video. Or what is the format for the interview, for present the interviews?
You can do either audio or video or both. Up to you.
Thank you.
All right. Now I will move into the actual application. So a little bit of background around things on this slide. We have a group of external community members who actually review the grants. So they are people who have strong connections to the humanities in DC. And although we on staff review all applications to make sure you're eligible for funding so that you would theoretically be able to receive funding, it's these reviewers who will really be reading through your answers and scoring them. And it's directly based off of the reviewers that it's determined who Humanities DC ends up funding. If you have more questions about the grant review process, that information is available on our website. And also grant reviewers can also apply for funding if you would like. You would just not be reviewing applications in the same grant program that you are applying to. So when I say that these are elements of successful applications, this is from feedback that we received directly from these reviewers, as well as, you know, us on staff figuring things out over time as well. So successful applicants say what their project scope is in a compelling manner, and it's very clear how their project can contribute to DC history, DC life, DC culture, as well as a clear explanation as to why oral history is the best format for the project. We have, again, 6 grant opportunities in 2024. Some of them deal with oral history and some of them don't. So as you're thinking through your application, really continue asking yourself why you think this kind of format is the best format for your actual project. Successful applications also provide ideas and explanations for who you want to be included in your project. So that would be any community partners if you're working with any organizations or community groups, as well as the actual team members. So the people who will be really working on the application, working on the interviews, if you are bringing in volunteers, for example, or paying people to interview narrators, as well as who you want to have as the narrators. Other people who might help with other elements of the project, such as people who will transcribe, people who would translate, things like that. So you don't have to have like every single person who will work on your project named in your application, but at least have ideas as to who these people will be and explain why you think that they would be great members of your team. Another element of successful applications is that the timeline seems reasonable. You won't be trying to do a gazillion things in a very short period of time, but that things are spread out as well as they can be. You're not taking on too much. Things will take a little longer than you expect. So if the timeline seems reasonable, if you explain your reasoning behind the timeline, then that would make your application more successful. Additionally, explaining your budget really well and having it really well organized. As I go into the actual application shortly, you will see what this actually looks like, but all elements of your budget do have to be explained in the budget narrative. And so making that really easy to read for reviewers is important. And if there's one piece of advice I give to applicants, it is to be as detailed as possible in your application. These reviewers might not know anything about your organization. They might not know anything about who you are, what your topic is. They won't know acronyms or slang terms, things like that. So really pay attention to the details that you provide in your application. Assume that people have no idea what you want to do. So the application is really where you can explain what you would like to do. And it is, again, totally fine if you have never done an oral history project before, if you've never interviewed people before, as long as you keep these elements in mind and provide as many details as possible, talk about your topic in an engaging way, things like that, it does not matter that you have never done an oral history project, because we will teach you how. So don't be scared about the grant requirements or anything else around this. Just have your application be as clear as possible with your passion for this showing. And then to kind of mirror that, there are some common application issues that reviewers have found, which is basically the opposite of the previous slide. So perhaps the applicant doesn't explain why the project is important to DC history, or why oral history is the best way to actually do this kind of project. Perhaps the project scope is too broad. The research question is not incredibly detailed. It's kind of like saying, oh, I want to interview people about DC history. Well, great, but that's really broad. So narrowing down your project scope to be perhaps about a particular community, a particular time period, etc., can really help. Because if you're just trying to do everything, that's pretty broad. Another issue is that the narrator involvement and how you will select the narrators is unclear. Again, you don't have to have like a really set way to select your narrators, but have some clear ideas about how you hope to choose people, different communities where you hope to go to ask people. Another issue is that the budget is not justified in the budget narratives. So dollar amounts are listed and they're not explained, or things are explained in weird places that don't make sense. This application will take time to get through, and it can be really clear in your writing if it was written too quickly in a rush. So definitely take your time. The application is due February 20th, so we encourage you to start actually writing things down as soon as possible. Another thing that could be an issue is that the timeline that you provide doesn't actually cover the entire project's lifespan. So with this project ending at the end of December, like if your timeline just goes up till, I don't know, August, then reviewers might take pause. I mean, if you explain that timeline clearly, then maybe it won't be a problem. But reviewers will understand that this kind of project takes a lot of time. So if your timeline doesn't cover the entire project's lifespan, just make sure to definitely explain as to why you think you'll be able to start or finish at a different time. And just like a mirror to the previous slide, a big issue is that you are not detailed enough. All of these bullet points kind of correspond to not being detailed. So just make sure to be, again, as detailed as possible. Next is something that we're doing this year is that we are weighing different application questions in different ways. So these percentages, which are also listed in the RFP as well as the actual application, these percentages are listed, and this really reflects what would make your application successful. The whole application is important, but I encourage you to take these percentages in mind. Reviewers will as well, and the scores will reflect these percentages. And so for capacity and personnel, which is 20% of the whole score, that looks at, does the project director and team members, collaborators actually have experience and expertise necessary to bring the project to completion? And again, you do not need to have oral history experience to actually apply, but do you have experience with your topic in other ways, for example? Next is the project description, feasibility, and timeline. This is really the crux of your application because it explains what you're actually going to do. Things are clear. It's clear that you're going to interview at least 5 people. You are saying, you are listing prospective narrators as possible. The timeline is feasible, and it will be important to DC and its residents. Next is the importance of community collaboration. And so this is really focused on the project team members, how important they will be to your project, including the narrators, as well as how the public will access, use, and engage the content of the interviews when you're done. And lastly, the budget itself. So the applicant clearly describes how all the funds will be used. They're directly tied to the project, and everything is explained really clearly.
Real quick, I just want to jump in, Hillary. We had a question about how might one comment on timelines if you've not done an oral history project before? That's a good question. And yeah, Hillary, I mean, feel free to go into that, but I have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, thinking about all of the steps that, Hillary's just outlined, figuring out who your narrators will be, thinking about how much time that will take, then thinking about when you're actually going to do the interviews. So that piece will be, a significant time. Then there's the other piece. There's, doing the transcription, whether you're working with a transcriber or doing that yourself, doing the metadata piece. So being, recognizing that the timeline is April 15th through the end of December, trying to space that out as much as possible. I think giving yourself a couple of months for each of those pieces in order to complete by December 31st should be good.
Exactly. Jasper, anything else to add about that question?
Yeah, I would just, kind of reiterate that it's not as important that the timeline have all the steps or be totally correct. Just, that it makes sense and that, it kind of recognizes that, this work takes time, and that like it can't all be done in a week or, be pushed to the end of the project period or something like that. I think as long as you show that you've put like some thought into it and it's logical, it should be, I don't know, the reviewers should be able to recognize that you put that thought into it.
All right. Any other questions for right now? Okay. So like I said earlier, Foundant is our grants portal. So this is where you will be actually submitting your application. And if you go to the grant opportunities page of our website, where I pointed you all before, you go down to applicant resources, you will see a link for Foundant instructions. And so this goes into detail about how to actually create an account, what you'll be seeing, and how to submit an application. So if you have never experienced Foundant before, please, please, please look at these instructions. It breaks things down step by step for you. And if you have applied for funding with Humanities DC previously, or your organization has, please continue using the same login that you used previously instead of creating a brand new account. If you do have any questions about Foundant, us on staff will be happy to help, but these instructions are located on our grant opportunities page. And so in Foundant itself, there is also a link to Foundant under applicant resources. So in Foundant itself, I'm going to go section by section of the application. All of these sections that you see on the screen, don't worry. No one will have to answer questions in every single section, but for the purposes of this workshop, I wanted to go into each and every section so you can see the potential sections that you will be answering questions about. Some of these sections will pop up based off of how you answer previous questions. Other sections will be for everyone. So if I'm talking about a question or a section that is not applicable to you, don't worry, because I'm sure that I will then move on to a section that will be applicable to you. Okay. So at the very top is, also, what you see on the screen here is slightly different from what you will see. So when you log on to Foundant, you will see your dashboard, which is the welcome page, and you should be able to see all of the 4 Cycle 1 grant opportunities. And so your screen will look slightly different from my screen. This is everything on the back end because I wanted to show you all of the potential sections. So the first section is about the review process. It talks a little bit more about the external grant reviewers, as well as a note reminding everyone that this is to collect oral history interviews. It is not for projects that make use of those interviews in other ways. And then going to the applicant information section. So just going in order, if you're an individual, you would check off individual. If you're applying through an organization, including through a fiscal sponsor, then you would click organization. And then just scrolling down a little bit. If you have if you have received funding from Humanities DC previously, you're welcome to talk about that experience here. This is a section that reviewers will not see. This is just for us to know on staff. And then if you check off the organization box, then you will have to fill out this section about you as an organization. So you would talk about your mission statement, how the project will support that mission, things like that. And then I'm skipping a few of these questions just because they are fairly self-explanatory and there are further instructions for these questions. But obviously, if you do have questions, feel free to ask during this workshop or contact us later. And then jumping down to UEI, so it stands for the Unique Entity Identifier, and it's required for all organizational applicants. Some of you might remember something called the DUNS number. The UEI replaced that a few years ago. And there's more information on UEI in the RFP, as well as the FAQ documents that are located again on the applicant resources part of the grant opportunities page. But just be aware that if you're an organization and you would like to apply for funding, you do need that UEI. The UEI is free to get. It does take a few days for it to process in the system, so definitely don't do that whole process really close to the application deadline. And then here is where you would actually say if the applicant is fiscally sponsoring another entity. Again, if you are having a fiscal sponsor for your project, that fiscal sponsor is the applicant. And so is this organization serving as a fiscal sponsor? Is the applicant serving as a fiscal sponsor? And if you check this box here saying yes, then more information will pop up specifically about the fiscal sponsor. As well as who or what the fiscal sponsor will actually be sponsoring. And a little letter of confirmation, so the fiscal sponsor knows what they're getting into when they agree to be a fiscal sponsor. But if you are an individual, then you would not be filling out the organizational sections. You would fill out this one instead. And so this includes your individual statement of interest. And we encourage you to really write about your passion. Like, why do you want to do this project? What actually motivated you to do it? As well as providing proof of how old you are and that you are a DC resident. And so capacity and key personnel section is 20% of your total score. Like I said earlier, this focuses on the actual individuals who will be doing the project themselves, excuse me. So it just has some quick information. Under project director resume, you're welcome to upload the resume or just a brief document talking about prior experience. It's flexible. And then here you would talk about prior work experience that's relevant to the current proposal. Like I've said many times and will continue to emphasize, you do not need to have oral history experience to apply for this grant. So in this box, you would just say, if you have experience or interest with the project topic professionally or personally. If you do have experience with oral histories, then this is where you can talk about that as well. And just to note, the project director is the driver of all the project activities. They're usually the main point of contact as well. Then lastly, team and collaborators. So you would talk about the other people who will help ensure the success of the project alongside the project director. So that might include other interviewers, partner organizations. If you would like a videographer, let's say, if you're going to be doing video files, that would be where you put them in here. And you don't necessarily need to have team members. It could theoretically be just the project director doing everything. But most projects do benefit from bringing on additional people. So the project director would not have to do everything themselves. It could allow for more community buy-in, things like that. The next section is project narrative. Again, this is 45% of your total score because it is what your project will actually entail. And so here, if you are applying for a new oral history project, you would check off new. If you are applying for the extension funds, that's where you would check off this box here down below. And so for the amount requested, like I said earlier, you can request up to $8,000 for project activities. But if you want to translate your oral histories into another language, then you can request an additional $5,000 that is specifically just for translation. Next is the section about the humanities discipline. Over here, obviously feel free to check off whichever primary discipline you so choose. Most oral histories do fall under the history category here. But if you think that your project focuses on something else, that's totally fine. And so this is where you would check off if you actually would like to translate your oral histories. Now down here is some demographic information of your target audience. Don't feel the need to expand your project beyond whatever age range, race and ethnicity, etc., that you deem most appropriate. You don't have to check off all these boxes if you don't think your project actually needs to target everyone. And then next is the area of interest, your research topic, what you are hoping to explore through the project. And this is where you would explain why oral history is the best format for this kind of project. And in all these sections, and especially in the section, I want to reiterate to just be as detailed as you possibly can here. And we will be updating the timeline down here to reflect that it's actually starting in mid-April. And so if you checked off the box earlier in the application that you will be collecting new oral histories, then this section will pop up. And the first question is about the grantee cohort participation. So again, before you apply, make sure you keep April 17th, 19th, and 23rd on your calendar to make sure you would be able to attend the trainings. So this would talk about what you hope to get out of being a part of this cohort, as well as talking a little bit more about how familiar you are with oral history. This section will be primarily used to help us and our training facilitators to figure out where people are in the process. Definitely be honest here. If you don't have any familiarity, then that's okay. Just write that. And if you checked off the box for the extension, then this would pop up. So you would just explain why you want to continue the project. So perhaps you didn't get to all of the interviews you wanted to, for example, or you think that getting additional interviews would be really helpful for your project, etc. And I want to emphasize this little section at the bottom here is that extension grantees extension applicants can also request up to $8,000, but definitely make sure to explain why, because reviewers would assume that you already have the equipment that you purchased for the original project, so you wouldn't have to spend money on more equipment theoretically. But again, you were totally welcome to request up to $8,000. Just make sure to really explain clearly what you hope to pay for with that. And before I get into the second half of the application, are there any questions so far? All right. So next is about translation. This section would only pop up if you say that you would like to request additional funding for translations. So this really depends on what your project is. So I know that some people on this call are interested in interviewing people in the Latino community. So perhaps you would like to translate Spanish oral histories into English or vice versa. Or, you know, there are plenty of languages that are spoken in DC. So you just list the languages and explain a little bit why you would like to receive this additional funding for a translation. Typically, it would be like that if you translate your oral histories, it would make them more accessible to the general public, make things a little easier for the narrators, etc. So just explain your reasoning.
And just a comment there that if you are recording your oral histories in a language that isn't English, that translation would be required because we do require that they be available in English. That's my understanding.
Yes.
That's correct. And I would also just add that what you're translating there is the transcripts, not the like actual audio recording. So in most cases, what you're transcribing there is the written transcript.
Yes, thank you both. Next section is on community collaboration. This is 25% of the total score. And this really illustrates how the prospective narrators and their communities will be involved in this project. Ideally, narrators would they would do more than just tell their story, and that's it for all the contact you have with them. You can involve them in other ways, perhaps. So perhaps they could connect the project director to other narrators they can communicate out to their own networks about the project. They can offer suggestions for where the oral history interviews would take place, things like that. So you can just be thoughtful in how to include them beyond just telling their story, because this is their story. So we want to make sure that their voices are heard throughout the project. And then additionally, DCOHC projects can include a small event to share back these oral histories with narrators and their communities. This is not required for any project, but if you would like to do this, totally fine. But just be aware that the point of this grant opportunity is to collect new oral histories and to archive them, not to have a big blowout event about it. So the shareback session should be on the small side. You are allowed to budget funds for this small event as well. But again, just keep in mind, this should not be like a huge presentation to everyone in DC, for example. The next section is the budget. So again, this will comprise 10% of the total score. Now I'll just go down section by section here. This first column here is where you would write in the dollar amounts for every single budget category. You do not have to have a dollar amount in every single row, but this is really where you would put where you hope that Humanities CC grant funds would go. Some projects cost more than what we at Humanities DC can provide you. So if you do have other sources of funding, you are welcome to add them here in this column. That's not required. If you think that, you know, you'll only get funding from Humanities DC, that's totally fine. But this column is just if you think you do have additional funding sources. And I know we started a few minutes late, but I know that people have really busy schedules, so I'm going to try to go quickly through this. So first section is the honoraria. You can also think of this as a stipend that you would pay to narrators, community participants, whereas salaries and wages are the wages that you would pay to the project team members. So for the salary and wages, those might be people who would get an hourly wage, for example, compared to the honoraria, which again is more like a stipend. Travel, so if you would like to yourself travel to different locations to do these interviews or bring narrators to locations, that's where you would put travel here. Supplies, this is where you can talk about like recording equipment, for example, or I don't know, pens to write notes. So like tangible items that would help you with the project. Next is publicity to market your project. Next is facilities. So these would be like if you are hoping to rent out a space to do the interviews, for example, this is where you would put that. Next is evaluation. You don't necessarily need an evaluation for this project, but if you would like, if you want to do surveys, for example, to narrators, you can put some funding aside just for that. And here's a special row just for translation. Again, it's up to $5,000. So this would be if you are using translation software, if you are hiring translators, things like that, all of the translation related costs would go in here. And then other is really anything else that doesn't fit neatly into one of these rows. And then down here is the budget narrative. And this is where you would very clearly say what each and every dollar amount is that you provided in your budget. You can provide equations here as needed for more complicated calculations. So like for salary, for example. And as you are going through your budget area, think of how you really want to record the interviews and where you would like them to take place. On our website, on the DCOHC webpage, that lists like the RFP for this opportunity, etc. There is a DCOHC specific FAQ document. And in that document, we talk briefly about potential expenses that you will possibly run into. So you can take a look at that document and have that be reflected in the budget if you would like. And I will say for the budget, this is an area that applicants usually have the most concern. And I want to emphasize that a budget is a plan. So the numbers that you put in here and the narrative, you just put whatever you deem appropriate at that point in time when you submit your application. We totally understand that things might change over time, that you might need to redirect funds later on. That is totally allowable for grantees. So just as long as you explain all of the dollar amounts as clearly as you can, that's what we're looking for. Next is the appendix. So this is any supporting documents that you can provide. Here are some various examples. If you have any documents that you think would be helpful for your application, you're welcome to put them in here. Next is accessibility. This section will only pop up if your organization has more than 15 or more employees. And this is to allow you to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. This won't pop up for everyone, but I do encourage you, even if you're an individual or have a small organization, to think about accessibility when you are working with your narrators and your interviewers. So like perhaps where interviews would take place. And then this is where you would sign. And you don't see this on my screen, but at the bottom, you will see two buttons. One is save and one is submit. Please save your application consistently so you don't lose anything. And when you're ready, you would submit your application. So with that, I know we are right at 1:30. I apologize for going right up until the end. But if you have any questions, feel free to say them now. If you do have to go, that's totally fine. You can sign up for office hours. The link for that is located on our website. But if you do have any questions, I at least can stay on for a little bit to answer any further questions.
I don't have any question. I just say one. Thank you very much for this information, and we need to check very careful because it's a lot of information and many details in the application. But thank you.
Yeah, of course. And again, this is currently being recorded. It will be on the website for future reference. All right. Well, now we're at 1:31.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course.
That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, of course. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.